Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the July um, through the end of my, really probably through the end of the year. Um, and this is going to be probably a longer video because there's a lot that occurred. And so in July, I was training for my job in wound care and going back and forth between Florida, Georgia, and here, and learning wound care. And early, while we were still training, while I was doing that home portion, we had a few more Bible studies, and then we put that on hold while I trained. And then in mid to late August, I was back in Fayetteville, and we started back with the Bible studies, and I was given my first facility, and things were going well. Then in September, I was still with one facility, and things were going quite well, still studying the Bible. Then in mid to late September, I had a conference, and it was down in Florida, and it was everybody who worked for the company. And when I was there, it was a great conference. I had a great time and learned a lot, met a lot of good folks. But there was also, I noticed some things in retrospect about the conference. There was a couple there who was from the Asheville area and worked for the company. They were over all the accounts in North Carolina. So they're basically the interface between the nursing home and our company. And the husband was really interested in me at the beginning, asking me all these questions about church and talking about how certain churches were cults and talking all these really religious stuff. And I didn't really understand why at the time, and he was asking me questions about the church I was attending and all these questions, and I was honest with him. And then his wife really took an interest in me when I was in the hot tub one day, and we sat and talked for over an hour about a lot of controversial things, and I was talking about how I didn't really agree with the hard right stances on a lot of things, or the far left. I'm really more in the middle. And you could tell, like, she didn't really care for that, but that was my experience at the conference. And there was an open bar one night, and I definitely took advantage of that because it was free, and we were having a party. And so at the party, I had fun, but didn't do anything irresponsible. But came back from the conference, worked a couple more weeks, and then in early October, all of a sudden, I got handed 5 new facilities, and had, at that point, I'd been worked up to 2 facilities, so kept one of my old facilities and added 5 new ones. And so I went from 2 facilities to 6, and it went from about 30 patients to about 100. And so I was trying to make it work throughout October, and slowly trying to make changes. But I started noticing, like, there was a lot of issues that needed to be fixed. There was a lot of inappropriate care, care that instead of doing the full workup, like, for example, an in-house pressure wound, it looks really bad in a nursing facility. I would notice that there was a bunch of in-house pressure wounds that these facilities were taking on legs. And that's a rare spot. Maybe the heel, you can have a pressure wound, but the rest of the legs, generally not a pressure wound. It's generally an arterial wound most of the time, or a diabetic wound. And so instead of doing the full workup that's imaging to find that it's arterial etiology, the previous provider was just labeling them as pressure and cutting on them each week. And if you do the imaging, this is why it's important. If you do the imaging, you can get the patient sent to vascular surgery, which will allow for potential for revascularization, which will allow the wound to heal. And these types of situations were present in so many of those patients. And so I was having to go in and rework up the patients because it was incorrect etiology, and then order tests. And it made my life really hard there at the beginning. And so I was going through that. About week 3 of it, I started realizing, like, I was told by my superior that, hey, make the changes, all of them, make them all that you need to make. So I was trying to do it slowly to not become overwhelmed. but he told me to go and do all of them. And at the same time, they were throwing a lot of new patients at me at these facilities. So it was a ton of work. And it got to the point where it was too much. And I knew that I had PTSD. And my initial traumatic event was whenever I felt like my superiors were doing things that were going to harm patients that I cared a lot about. And that's what caused the trauma. So I decided I would put the ball in my company's court. I called my boss and told him, hey, there's all these things going on from the previous provider, and I'm really having some struggle here. I need help. And he told me to just keep white knuckling it. And at that point, it was like I was back in the trauma again from residency. And I was worried about my safety, worried about the patients, crying. I actually went to church that night and was breaking down in church. And so I called out that night from work because I was sick, and told them I couldn't come in. And at first they were very supportive of that. But then they started asking me to write these notes. They're like, we need the notes from this past week. And I was sick. And so I told them I couldn't do it. And then a day passes, and at that point, I had talked to the Bible study leaders, and they wanted to do a study that night. And I was like, okay. And so we went to go do the study. While we were doing the study, I was told them about what had happened at work, and because I thought it was a safe place. But I'd also noticed, like, at times I felt like there was information being passed back and forth between work and my church group. And the way I figured that out is I'd feed information in one end and see if it'd come out the other. And I had confirmation of that. So I was suspicious, but then I became really suspicious of them when at the end of the Bible study, they asked me what I did with my old Ford Fusion. And the thing is, I had gotten rid of it, but I had only told the person that I got rid of it to. I told the person who I got rid of it to. That's the only person I had told about that car. And I'd never driven that car to church. So I knew that somebody related to that person had let somebody within the church know that I'd given them that car. And it'll become more important later on. But that's what happened that night. That same day, my ex was causing lots of problems playing on me being super vigilant, wanting me to sign papers for our son to go to Peru, want me to use a virtual notary, and all these things were happening at the same time. And I was very suspicious in that time because I felt like the church it felt like the church, my ex-wife, and my current job were all kind of playing off each other. And so I stayed out of work, went to urgent care, got me a note. And after I got me a note, they stopped pushing for me to do the notes. And so I eventually, after the work note went away, I stayed out for 4 days, and then I went back to work on the notes. And I got one facility's notes completed, and then after that, my psychiatrist wanted me to stay out longer. She didn't think I was ready to go back, even though I felt like I was ready to go back and see patients the next week. Instead of giving me more time, my job told me that I would have to resign, but they would rehire me within 90 days if I was ready to go. And I told them that seems unfair. I could take an unpaid leave of absence. And I mean, I was dealing with a disability. So it just seemed like it was a very poor way of them to handle it. And I told them that my psychiatrist would be able to write a note, and they said it didn't matter. Several days go on, and then I talked to my therapist. She's like, well, just go along, see if you can finish the notes, and then see how they respond to that. And so I told work that, hey, I'll finish those notes. Just give me a day. And I knocked them out. And then afterwards, they told me that I resigned. And I told them I did not resign. And they're like, well, you owe us all this money for your retention bonus, when I knew that I did not owe them that money because I did not resign. In the contract, you only owe the retention money if you were fired for cause or if you resign. And so I knew that was bull. But I still had suspicions that work and church were communicating, but I couldn't figure out from where. And then I, so at this point, I don't have a job. And I'd also forgot to mention that at the Bible study meeting where they asked me about the car, I also told them about Zoe, some of the things Zoe had told me over the previous few weeks, which was, I don't like Frank, I don't like Frank, I don't like Frank. And how I'd noticed that he was avoiding him whenever he'd see Frank at church. And Frank had been in Kids Kingdom. And so after Frank was in Kids Kingdom, I noticed the changes in Zoe. And so I was concerned about it, but didn't know how to address it. And I didn't have Zoe at the time, so I couldn't ask him directly. But fast forward back to after I got resigned, a few days after I got resigned, then I got Zoe. And when I talked to Zoe, I asked him, do you like mommy? Yes. Do you like Abwe? Yes. Do you like Nini? Yes. Do you like daddy? Yes. Do you like Green Goblin? No, he throws pumpkins at Spider-Man. Do you like Hunter? Yes. Do you like Grace? Yes. Do you like Frank? No, he hurt me on purpose. And I was like, really? Well, what did he do? He said, he scratched me down here and pointed down towards his legs. And I was like, well, maybe it was an accident. He said, no, he did it on purpose. And I was really concerned by that. At the time, I thought that he maybe just accidentally scratched him, but the more that I thought about it, if it was something more sexual in nature, I don't think Zoe would have the vocabulary to describe it. So I don't know what really happened, but I do know what my son told me. And because of that concern, I have not brought him back around the ICOC since. And I told the leaders of Kids Kingdom about it. They didn't do anything. And after I spoke to the leaders of Kids Kingdom about it, the next Sunday was the sermon from Don Mahardy was about deceivers and how they need to be thrown out. And it felt very directed at me. And so, so all that had occurred. And then fast forward a few weeks, I made the connection of where the mole was at my job that was communicating with the church. And I did that because I thought about the conference where I was at and thought about who did I have long conversations with. And it was that couple that stood out to me. And I knew they were in Asheville. I knew there was a church in Asheville called the Asheville Church Network. And that's supported by the Fayetteville Church. So I looked at the leaders to see like, I wonder if they're affiliated with it. And sure enough, that couple, I saw a picture of them leading the Hendersonville microchurch. And to me, that felt so deceptive for them to come and ask me all these questions, almost spy on me, not tell me they're affiliated with the ICOC, and me just feel like I'm being stalked. And it's interesting because if you look at their website, they don't mention the ICOC at all, but all their doctrine is ICOC. And I was literally sat through services in the Fayetteville church that talked about supporting them financially. So, so that was, once that clicked, I was like, that's where it happened. And I also realized after I called out Don Mahardy, that's when the person for my residency started harassing me. And I hadn't talked to him in many months, but he's the one that introduced me to my friend that I gave my car to. And he's the one that was our mutual friend. And so I figured out that resident, he's the reason, he was the mole for Don Mahardy in the ICOC. And he's harassed me, he's blackmailed me since, and I've had to block him. But that is really what's summed up everything that's happened. Once I started calling out Don Mahardy, he started calling my parents. There's been other church members that have tried to infiltrate my family and use my own family against me. And that's the thing, though, is they underestimate us as a family. They underestimate us whites and how much we love each other, how much we love God. We realize God is so much bigger than the ICOC. He is so powerful, and he loves us, and we love each other. And that love will protect us. And so they have tried to use my family against me, but that stopped. And it stopped because we as a family have decided to stop it. So that's really my story right now. I'm looking for more jobs in wound care, looking for more jobs in informatics. I have an unrestricted medical license, and I love serving patients. I feel like it's my calling. I feel like when I'm doing the wound care, I'm living like Jesus. I'm showing the love of Jesus. And I know I am not God, but God works through people. And I do feel like he's working through me when I'm practicing medicine. So I'm grateful for that. And grateful to be able to tell my story from the other side. Be well.